Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Here we will present about Westward Expansion. When was the Westward Expansion? The Westward Expansion of the United States took place during the 19th century, starting in 1830 with the Louisiana Purchase and ending in 1890. When the U.S. Census Superintendent formally announced that the country frontier had been settled. Next slide 3. Key events of Westward Expansion. Next slide. 1830 Louisiana Purchase. Westward Expansion began in earnest in 1830. Thomas Jefferson negotiated a treaty with France in which the United States paid French 15 million for the Louisiana Territory, 828,000 square miles of land west of the Mississippi River, effectively doubling the size of the young nation. The Louisiana Purchase stretched from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains and from Canada to New Orleans, and it doubled the size of the United States. Next slide. 1850 Lewis and Clark Expedition. In 1850, President Jefferson sent explorers Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, commonly known as Lewis and Clark, to explore the area west of the Mississippi River. They started with the area included in the Louisiana Purchase, then went farther west. They began in St. Louis, eventually making their way to the Pacific Ocean, crafting detailed maps along the way. In 1860, they returned to where their journey starts, then report the findings of their expedition. Next slide. 143 Great Migration via the Oregon Trail. In 1843, close to 1,000 people joined together to traverse the Oregon Trail via a wagon train, a feat that required going over the treacherous Rocky Mountains. They began in Independence, Missouri, and made it all the way to Oregon country, what still belongs to England. Their approximately 2,000-mile journey was a success, a fact that surprised many people who did not think the group would be able to safely navigate the long journey. They settled the area and were followed by thousands more over the next few years. Next slide. 1845 Texas statehood. Texas officially became a state in December 29, 1845. In 1844, the Republic of Texas entered into a treaty of annexation with the United States, laying the groundwork for statehood. In 1845, Congress passed a joint resolution in favor of annexing Texas, which was approved by voters in the then Republican states.
1847 Mormons settle Utah. Fleeing violence and religious persecution, the Mormons left their settlement in Illinois and headed west in search of new homeland. Under the leadership of Brigham Young, they transferred more than 1,300 miles west through the wilderness, crossing the Rocky Mountain and stopping in what is known as Utah. Seeking an isolated place to call home, they opted to stop in the Great Wall. Seeking an isolated place to call home, they opted to stop in the Great Salt Lake Valley, which they decided would be their promised land. By the end of the year, around 2,000 Mormons had settled in Utah.
1848. California Gold Rush begins. Gold was discovered in Northern California, spurring thousands of people to find their way to the West Coast in search of riches. Prior to the gold rush, fewer than 1,000 people lived in California. So many people flocked to the time 1848 drew to a close. The gold rush continued, peaking in 1852, then declining until it ended in 1857. 1850. California statehood. California officially became a state in September 8, 1850, just 2 years after ceded to the United States by Mexico via the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Unlike other states in the West, California was granted statehood without first having been a territory. 1859. Oregon statehood. Oregon Country officially became a state in February 14, 1859, after being ceded to the United States by England in 1846 via the Oregon Treaty. This occurred as a result of being settled by those who migrated to Oregon City via the Oregon Trail during the 1840s. 1862. Homestead Act. With the passing Homestead Act of 1862, people were eligible to claim up to 160 acres of land in the West. After residing on the land for 5 years and making improvements, at that time the land would be given to those who settled it. Many people rushed to the West to claim their land and establish a homestead. Approximately 500 million acres were assigned to those who made claims under this law between 1862 and 1904. About 80 million of those acres went to homesteaders. The rest went to business interests such as cattlemen, timbermen, railroads, miners, and speculators. 1874. South Dakota Gold Rush. Colonel George Armstrong Custer led an 1874 expedition on which gold was discovered in the Black Hills of the part of Dakota Territory that is now South Dakota. This sparked a brand new gold rush, drawing speculators seeking to strike it rich to settle in the area. Within 2 years, nearly 10,000 people had relocated to the area on a quest for gold. 1889. Dakota Territory statehood. The Dakota Territory was split into two parts in 1889. Both North Dakota and South Dakota became states in 1889. A vast area, this part of the country was among the last places to be settled before the Westward Expansion timeline drew to a close.
So in 1890, America declared to be settled. In 1890, reporting on the results of the rapid westward expansion of the United States, the head of the U.S. Census announced that the country's settlement had been completed. This marks the end of the westward expansion timeline. To the westward expansion began with rural farms on the frontier. By 1890, many cities have been established and were quite populated. So this is the westward expansion timeline. You can saw on the slide. Next, the conflict during the westward expansion. So, Manifest Destiny. By 1840, Nearly 7 million Americans, until 40% of the nation's population lived in the Trans-Appalachian West. Following a trail blazed by Lewis and Clark, most of these people had left their homes in the East in search of economic opportunity. Like Thomas Jefferson, many of these pioneers associated westward migration, land ownership, and farming with freedom. In Europe, large numbers of factory workers formed a dependent and seemingly permanent working class. By contrast, in the United States, the western frontier offered the possibility of independence and upward mobility for all. In 1843, 1,000 pioneers took the Oregon Trail as part of the Great Immigration. Manifest Destiny. In 1845, a journalist named John O'Sullivan put a name to the idea that helped put many pioneers toward the western frontier. Westward migration was an essential part of the Republican project, he argued, and it was Americans' manifest destiny to carry the great experiment of liberty to the edge of the continent, to overspread and to possess the whole of the land which Providence has given us, O'Sullivan word. The survival of American freedom depended on it. And then Westward Expansion and Slavery. The Westward Expansion carried slavery down into the Southwest, into Mississippi, Alabama, crossing the Mississippi River into Louisiana. Finally, by the 1840s, it was pouring into Texas. So the expansion of slavery, which became the major political question of the 1850s, was not just a political issue. Americans in 19th century thought of or spoke of their country as in Jefferson's phrase, an empire of liberty, and the history of the United States was conceived of as part of the progress of mankind and the spirit of liberty throughout the world. And you can see this in graphic illustrations of the period of liberty leading people westward, and progress was the essence of the American story. Now, in the South, Southern Slovenes insisted that slavery was absolutely essential to that story of progress. So without slavery, you could not have civilization, they said. Slavery freed the upper class from the need to do manual labor, to worry about economic day-to-day realities, and therefore gave them the time and the intellectual ability to devote themselves to the arts and literature and mechanical advantage and inventions of all kinds, so that it was slavery itself which made the progress of civilization possible. Now, Northerners by this period wouldn't have put exactly that way because they lived in a non-slave area, but I think in the North, the connection of slavery and American growth was really sort of ignored. In other words, people would talk about expansion of the empire of liberty and never quite mention that millions of people in this empire of liberty were slaves.
Westward Expansion and the Mexican War. The Mexican-American War of 1846 to 1848 marked the first U.S. armed conflict chiefly fought on foreign soil. It pitted a politically divided and militarily unprepared Mexico against the expansionist-minded administration of U.S. President James K. Polk, who believed the United States had a manifest destiny. to spread across the continent to the Pacific Ocean. A border skirmish along the Rio Grande that started off the fighting was followed by a series of U.S. victories. When the dust cleared, Mexico had lost about one-third of its territory, including nearly all of present day California, Utah, Nevada, Arizona, and New Mexico. Causes of the Mexican-American War, Texas gained its independence from Mexico in 1836. Initially, the United States declined to incorporate into the Union, largely because Northern political interests were against the addition of a new state that supported slavery. The Mexican government was also encouraging borders rights and warning that any attempt of annexation would lead to war. Nonetheless, annexation procedures were quickly initiated after the 1844 election of Polk, a firm believer in the doctrine of manifest destiny, who campaigned that Texas should be re-annexed, and that the origin territory should be reoccupied. Polk also had his eyes on California, New Mexico, and the rest of what is today the American Southwest. When his offer to purchase those lands was rejected, he instigated a fight by moving troops into a disputed zone between the Rio Grande and Nueces River that both countries had previously recognized as a part of the Mexican state of Coahuila. Westward Expansion and the Compromise of 1850. In 1848, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo ended the Mexican War and added more than 1 million square miles, an area larger than the Louisiana Purchase, to the United States. The acquisition of this land reopened the question that the Missouri Compromise had ostensibly settled. What would be the status of slavery in new American territories? After 2 years of increasingly volatile debate over the issue, Kentucky Senator Henry Clay proposed another compromise. It had 4 parts. For the first, California would enter the Union as a free state. Second, the status of slavery in the rest of the American territory would be decided by the people who live there. Third, the slave trade, but not slavery, would be abolished in Washington, D.C. And fourth, a new Fugitive Slave Act would enable Southerners to reclaim runaway slaves who had escaped to the northern states where slavery was not allowed. And last, the Bleeding Kansas. In 1854, Illinois Senator Stephen A. Douglas proposed that the 2 new states, Kansas and Nebraska, be established in the Louisiana Purchase, west of Iowa and Missouri. According to the terms of the Missouri Compromise, both the states would prohibit slavery because both were north of the 36°30 parallel. However, since no certain legislator would approve a plan that would give more power to free soil, Northerners Douglas came up with a middle ground that he called popular sovereignty, letting the settlers of the territories decide for themselves whether their state would be slave or free. Nonetheless, we were outraged. Douglas, in their view, had caved to the demands of the Confederacy at their expense. The battle for Kansas and Nebraska became a battle for the soul of the nation. Immigrants from northern and southern states tried to influence the vote. For example, thousands of Missourians flooded into Kansas in 1840, 1854, and 1855 to vote fraudulently in favor of slavery. Free soil settlers established a rival government, and soon Kansas spiraled into civil war. Hundreds of people died in the fighting that ensued, known as Bleeding Kansas. A decade later, the Civil War in Kansas over the expansion of slavery was followed by a national civil war over the same issue. As Thomas Jefferson had predicted, it was the question of slavery in the West, a place that seemed to be the emblem of American freedom that proved to be the knell of the Union. That's enough from us. Hopefully you understand what we have explained. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.